Hello! I'm still working on animations. I'm just really slow because I'm old and wasted time again working on a Sonic Roboblast 2 level. But to the topic at hand. Sonic Frontiers has been out for a while, and I only confuse its name with Sonic Force's name half the time anymore. And to celebrate that, let's have a bit of a discussion about a few elements of the game. A little dissection, if you please. Spoilers ahead.
Luke still hasn't played Frontiers yet, so I'm taking his place.
Curse Luke for having a real life.
I suppose we should start with a brief review of what we thought of the game before we start.
Sure.
For me, this is easily the best game we've gotten in over a decade, and on a pure spectacle standpoint, it's unquestionably the best game Sonic's ever had. It is not without its faults, but if they can perfect this formula for later games, then the future of the series is very bright. So yeah, I liked it. Solid 7 out of 10 at its worst. There's a lot to love about this game, like the epic boss fights and the characterization of the cast, but for the most part, the game's a pretty straightforward and competent open world game. Open zone, which sounded very dumb and vague when Iizuka kept demanding we call it that, but I suppose most open world games have a single map instead of 5, so maybe that's what open zone means?
I explored that theme a couple videos ago, but never mind that now.
Either way, it's fun to play, but could use a little extra Sonic energy to it.
Same. Though some things I hate are the 2D linear gameplay elements in a freaking overworld. Sonic Team really can't let it go, can they? And the most boring collection of level themes I've seen in a Sonic game since Sonic Labyrinth and Sonic Blast.
At this point, I'd rather the level themes be realistic and boring than surreal and cartoony. At least it's slightly closer to that adventure-era feel we've been missing for so long.
If there were cities and casinos and theme parks and stuff, I might have agreed.
And while it's certainly annoying to suddenly be locked into a 2D side path you just happened across, it should be noted that any way you want to play this game is completely valid. You don't have to do any of the 2D sections. There are so few things in the game that are actually required, and that includes 1 or 2 mini-games per island to get Chaos Emeralds. Everything else can be done by just fishing.
That is true, and that is kinda neat. Everyone we've talked to seems to grade this game about a 7.5. Easily the most consistent Sonic game in a while. Still, with Frontiers, I'm really curious how it's going to age. This game feels like the kind of experience that audience reception might change over time. Right now we're in a state of shock with the upgraded characterization and the open world stuff. After it sinks in, the quality of these things are going to be judged way more harshly. It's kind of like with Sonic Colors, where it was universally loved for being so different from all the dark, edgy games before, but then people got way more critical on whether the game actually did a good job at it.
Sonic Frontiers' place in history might be dependent on what the games afterwards will do. This game feels very much like a bridge game, cleaning up the characterization of the cast and introducing a new game design philosophy. If the Fallout will improve upon it and grow, this game will go down in history as the moment the series started to take itself seriously again. But if the next game falls on its face, it'll be another weird experimental oddball in the series, like Lost World was before.
Right. Well, we'll get back to Frontiers part of history later, and let's dive into a few topics of interest. Let's start with Sage, the big new star of the game, Daddy's little creepy daughter of doom.
Like seemingly a lot of things from this game, Sage might just be a big rip-off of Neon Genesis Evangelion, to the point that her voice actress in both Japanese and English voiced Rei Ayanami. It's a welcome copy, and it isn't like this is the first time beloved elements of the games are copy-pasted from other franchises.
Insert JoJo reference.
I think Sage works great as a new henchwoman for Eggman, mostly because she's the only one that works both as an intimidating threat, looking all creepy and being this cold, calculating machine finding the most efficient strategy to get the job done, but she also works well for the more comedic side of Eggman, being a willing family member of the gang with a nice contrasting personality with the rest. As opposed to, say, Orbot and Cubot, who only work as comedic characters, or Infinite and Metal Sonic, that only work as serious characters. Unless you're willing to break them for the sake of a joke, which we would, but bad idea for the game's canon.
She also works better as a physical opponent for Sonic. Well, okay, not better than Metal Sonic. He's still the best heavy. But unlike Orbot and Cubot, Sage is introduced being in control of big mechas, even piloting one at the end.
Appropriate, considering her clear inspiration.
So looking forward to seeing her pop in frequently with a new giant robot to try and crush Sonic with. It's a bit of a shame. I always wanted to see Orbot and Cubot try and pilot their fighter to battle Sonic, but it was not meant to be. They're too goofy for that, I guess. Even though that's exactly why I love the idea. If you're gonna turn Sonic into a zany comedy anyway, at least do something actually funny.
You know, I have a hunch Sage might get a visual overhaul for the next game. For Frontiers, she's fully designed to be the creepy main villain character for the sake of a twist, but she sticks out like a sore thumb as an Eggman baddie, so I assume next time she'll get a different outfit or armor to make her look more Eggman-y. We'll have to see.
Well, I can't help but notice she looks kinda Infinite-esque?
That is true. That is never addressed in the games, but I get the feeling she's supposed to be made of the same material as Infinite. Now, Infinite's backstory has always been confusing because Sonic Forces runs with two different stories. In the main game, it's heavily implied Infinite is a complete artificial construct made by Eggman in a lab, while Shadow's DLC instead portrays him as a mercenary jackal that Eggman upgraded.
What a mess. I kinda assumed the original backstory of Robot Infinite was thrown out when Sonic Team went out of their way to make up the second backstory. Infinite being a more fluffy-looking robot was out, and him being a guy in a suit was the proper backstory.
You'd think so, but now here's Sage, another soft-looking creation of Eggman with the same glitches and effects. This seems to indicate we're back to the first backstory of Infinite. Sage is now the second robot Eggman made with the same general materials and techniques, just in the form of a human girl this time.
Heck, who knows? If you want a slightly dark flavor to Sage's backstory, it's easy to imagine she might have been Frankenstein out of Infinite's body. I mean, we never find out what happened to him after he was zapped away. Maybe Eggman dismantled him and recycled him into Sage? Oof, what a way to have Infinite return to the games, with a sex and even species change. But that's just speculation, so never mind.
I doubt Sonic Team will ever elaborate, but looking forward to see whatever crazy fanfics people come up with.
Send your fanfics to Captain Theory's email address, which is
No. Anyway, her dynamic with Eggman reminds me of what Orbot was like in Sonic Unleashed, back before he was even Orbot. The poor, beleaguered assistant of Eggman who has it all figured out, yet can't get the big, bombastic man-child to stay focused, watching helplessly as Eggman's pettiness causes him to create his own downfall yet again.
Oh, I wish! That would have been great, but we never really saw that dynamic in Sonic Frontiers itself.
That's mostly because Eggman was never in a position of control. He's stuck in cyberspace for the most part, but I can easily imagine this dynamic being front and center if we did get to see Eggman in action with Sage in tow.
Someone even pointed out to me that Sage was at first just a device Eggman used, and only turned into a girl as a result of the glitches later. Wasn't really clear to me. But right, tangent. Back to Sage resembling Orbot again. Her interacting with her two robot siblings is sitcom gold right there. I think Orbot and Cuba's lazy and uselessness will be more amusing when they have a frustrated Sage in tow, rather than them directly pestering Dr. Eggman. The big problem really is what we said before. We never really get to see any of this interesting dynamic in Frontiers because Dr. Eggman is out of commission for the most part. When the scene comes when Sage has her sad montage of scenes with her daddy, it just made me laugh how it's constantly the same setup with each flashback over just briefing with Eggman on the same piece of road in cyberspace. It reminded me of a joke in Beavis and Butthead when they have their entire lives flash in front of them and it's just the same shot of them hanging in front of the TV over and over. But yeah, Frontiers has a lack of things happening. One big issue I had with Sonic for a long time, and Frontiers only made it worse. The problem with the entire game is it's just Sonic in a dead wasteland with nothing but a bunch of ghosts to interact with. Very little you can do with that setup. It's kind of funny how many Sonic games have hours of cutscenes where nothing much is happening. First were the Pontiff games where all the cutscenes just had to be filled up with bad jokes. Then Team Sonic Racing where the story just keeps going on a loop for eternity, constantly repeating whether the Dungo suspicious. Exciting!
I don't think Frontiers is doing so badly in that regard. Comic book writer Ian Flynn fills the time a little better by instead turning it into a therapy session for most of the characters so we can re-rail some broken characterization. I found most of the conversations the characters have with one another very interesting. A big step up from the previous games spinning their wheels for most of the running time. In Frontiers, at least most of the talking is productive and world-building and not just terrible joke after terrible joke.
And speaking of Ian Flynn, lore, hallelujah! Our complaint about the broken writing of Sonic has finally been answered by Sega. Finally, Janitor Flynn is in a position where he can really get all those broken characters properly fixed up. And again, me calling him a janitor isn't an insult, it's a good thing. Honestly, I don't get why janitors have a bad reputation anyway. Do you want to work in a school or a messy building with broken utilities? Bless those getting our living and workspaces back in order. My clumsy ass can't.
Indeed, we at Sonic Dissected salute all the brave janitors out there protecting us from the dirtiest of hallways. We are grateful. And speaking of being grateful, aren't we lucky Sage was introduced in the series at this point in time? If they made her a decade ago, she'd go the way of Zavok and have all of her characterization and potential faded out of existence before the game was even over.
Ah, poor Zavok. Never forget.
I already forgot. He's so boring. But yeah, we got some proper writers. Sega's even looking for a freaking lore master, so that's great news.
Is it? As my friend Elise told me, the problem with the Sonic lore is it's so helplessly broken now, you really have to start from scratch or do some real aggressive housekeeping to get Sonic's lore in any kind of functional shape. And while I'm more willing than her to shrug away inconsistent details, I mean, I never expected them to go that deep and detailed with setups before. My frustration was mostly when they managed to screw up fundamental details, like forgetting Silver from the future or Shadow's emotional driving force. That's not typical nerdy, hey, in issue number 58, chapter 2, this little obscure detail the character mentioned you forgot. These are fundamental details of the characters that, looking up on their profile on a Wikipedia page, are mentioned in the opening paragraph. That's really their level of writing I wanted. Writers who briefly look at the opening paragraph of the characters' profiles. Don't need to read the entire page with every minuscule detail, just the general overview. Is that too much to ask? So in that regard, them at least getting the fundamental details of the characters right from now on is good enough. The writing had been so god-awful this decade that writers remembering that Tails is supposed to be halfway competent or Knuckles is duty-driven guardian is already kind of shocking to me. So that's being fixed, cool. But, lore masters, we're immediately going to the other extreme, huh? I mean, that seems to be a good thing, but I'm kind of wary with Sonic Team. They always tend to go overboard with their corrections. I mean, yes, I wanted Sonic to be more serious after Lost World was a complete careless clown show, but turning Frontiers into this depressing art movie wasn't really what I had in mind either. Well, here's your serious Sonic game. It's about death and dying and more death and destruction and accepting doom and dying and more death.
I prefer to look at it as rebirth rather than Frontiers being about death. Accepting what happened and moving on to whatever comes next.
Look, I'm being Goldilocks here, looking for the right porridge, but can only find porridge that's too cold or too hot. And that's freezing or burning to death, holding cold. Well, whatever.
It's understandable you'd be a little wary. Sonic is an action series. We want energy. Frontiers is much more calm and composed. I would have liked to have seen a little more ham with Dr. Eggman being more active or some more interaction from the Titans. Those sequences where the Titans attack Sonic halfway through the islands were always a highlight, though. Exactly what gave Frontiers the burst of life to feel like a proper Sonic game. It's still there, just not as much as we wanted it to be, perhaps. Though maybe that was a budget thing.
Right, but Lore Master, that conjures up thoughts of dusty books. Look, we ain't setting this new open zone era of games to be endless games of Sonic stuck in a dead wasteland while ghosts keep barfing lore out to us, are we? That's cute for one game, but if all games we're getting this decade, all one of them to keep this production level, are gonna be like this, I'm gonna be really wary and apathetic.
Time will tell. Anything's possible, especially if this game will do well and Sega ups the budget for the next game. Open worlds are expensive and complex to make, where linear action games can afford to have luxurious things like different level themes. Open worlds tend to focus more on one general single setting, and while it may have various biomes or cultures, it will typically try to stay coherent. Sonic Team using the cyberspace levels for variety, even if they are from recycled material, greatly diminishes this problem. It shows Sonic Team is very aware of the problem and are doing what they can, within budget, to alleviate your concerns.
Yeah, true.
Perhaps next game we need a more fully featured landscape. Although ironically that risks the possibility of the world feeling too small. Take deserts for example. What's supposed to be a vast sizzling desert feels kinda sad and pathetic when it's a 5-minute walk away from a lush forest and surrounded on all sides by ocean. Deserts work better as isolated levels like Shamar and Unleashed, implying the desert will continue miles and miles beyond the playable area.
What I always wanted to see with an open world Sonic game is something like Just Cause, with tons of little mountain towns, populated with IDW-style civilians. Have a bunch of epic military Eggman bases across the landscape, and boom! A game really set in Sonic's world, rather than just throwing him into a dumbass limbo dimension or dead wasteland again. However, I doubt it will happen. Nuzuka mentioned in interviews he's deliberately avoiding this kind of world setup. Not to mention this is really expensive with requiring actual world building and NPC characters and actual content.
I think Azuka just said he wanted to avoid the gameplay structure of these games, not necessarily avoid adding towns to his open world at all. Frontiers did have something similar to Shopkeepers in the game after all. Again, it's probably a budget thing.
Or heck, if you're sticking to open zone, just an open and gameplay area without world building, make them actual zones. Not desert and grass, but zones with actual imagination and creativity as actual zones. Some indie Sonic games gave us a taste of what proper open zone fantasy style levels would be like in Sonic GT, Sonic Utopia, or Sonic Speed Simulator. Heck, Sonic R kinda did in a way with its open-endedness.
Like I keep saying, what you want is really expensive. I can't shake the feeling that modern Sonic games have severe budget issues. Force has already felt like they put all their budget in some areas, like the wonderful-looking city levels, but then most other levels look like cobbled together from leftover assets, especially the casino forest.
Yeah. I can't shake the feeling that most of Sonic Frontiers looks the way it does, not because of artistic direction, but from what material Sonic Team could cobble together. Like the fishing minigame, for example. I kind of raised my eyebrow in confusion when I saw how many beautifully detailed models of the fish you catch are presented in the game. Are you telling me the Sonic Team really spent so much time and money making all these fish models and animations? Realistic Earth fish, even, when they could get away a lot easier with just making them flicky-style fish that even would fit better with Sonic's world anyway.
Realistic-looking animals still fit into the Sonic series. They were all over the adventure era of games.
Really? They look stylized to me. There's pink bunnies, even unicorns, and phoenix birds.
I was more referring to things like the giant alligator in Lost Jungle or the killer whales in Emerald Coast and Wave Ocean. Hell, Big himself could also catch some realistic-looking fish in Sonic Adventure. Anyway, with movies there's this term called shooting the rodeo. It's when movies with a low budget would take advantage of any events happening close by, such as a rodeo or a circus, and secretly film part of their movie there for instant production value. Now your movie has all these vast crowds and spectacular rodeo stunts, all without costing the production team a dime, all for the low price of these scenes looking completely out of place and pointless in the rest of the movie. So I wouldn't be surprised if Sonic Team got these fish models through some alternative method. An asset pack perhaps, a cancelled sequel to Sega Bass Fishing they salvaged some assets from, who knows? And who cares? Letting these models go to waste if they weren't being used is a shame, and now we get a fun activity in Sonic Frontiers for it. I'm all for effective use of assets.
That's true. The fish do look impressive and it's fun to collect them all. And some gags too. Still, can't help but think it feels cheap. Like this art style for the island. Was that genuinely chosen by the art team? Was this genuinely what they designed for this mysterious vibe they're going for? Or does the Frontiers art style look like this because that's what they're stuck with the assets they're recycling from other sources? After all, this is the most non-Sonic environment we have ever seen.
Again, this isn't too unusual for a Sonic game. 06 did this, perhaps to an extreme we shouldn't aim for, but I think Unleashed hit a nice balance of realistic and stylized. Granted, these games had a little more personality with their towns and interesting level themes, but there's definitely areas that look similar.
Realistic, stylized, I don't give a damn. Just make it interesting, realistic or cartoony. I despise Empty Wasteland as much as random abstract shapes in the sky. They both suck. But look, I'll forgive Frontiers for it. It fits with the story, and there are enough interesting other qualities to the game, like the bosses in the story, so fine. And 3D platforming. I missed you, baby. I missed you so much in the Sonic game. Look, I can jump in 3D. Hoo-hoo! But with open zone being the standard for the future, I really hate the idea of us getting nothing but games set in empty fields in every damn Sonic game for over a decade, just like Green Hill Zone have been shoved down my throat.
The success of this game, the success of the movies, everything seems to indicate the next game will also be an improvement. Like how Sonic Adventure 2 was a big improvement on Sonic Adventure 1.
Yeah, the Sonic levels were better, but it lost kind of its charm by removing the adventure worlds. More like how Generations is a huge improvement on Unleashed.
I suppose Generations did have some interesting refinements on gameplay that makes some like it a little more than Unleashed. Anyway, we all agree Frontiers can use some improvements, and there's no reason to think these improvements aren't coming. With the success of the Sonic movie and a fresh new batch of fans and attention, Sega has more motivation to improve than they had in years. We should have some hope, especially in the writing department. They made huge improvements in the writing.
Sure, let's talk some more about the writing. So, The End, our new exciting main villain. She is, well, let's just say Mephiles and Merlina don't have to worry about competition. So, The End. Its name kind of bothers me.
I assume because you find it uncreative?
No, I mean, I get it. Each of the big boss enemies has a title name, right? Tower, Ninja, Squid, Caterpillar! Ooh. So sure, with that theme, we end with, well, the End, the biggest of all enemies. However, all the other enemies we fought are all part of the Ancients' defense force. The End isn't. It's its own entity. In fact, it's the very thing why the Ancients build a defense force. So, why does it still have a name in the same theme? That's like if Perfect Chaos was called E520, as if it's one of Eggman's robots or something.
Well, I don't feel as though it is literally named The End. Rather, during its monologue it says, "No matter what form I take, the end comes for you all." It feels as if The End is what the Ancients called it, rather than what it calls itself.
Perhaps, but it sounds sloppy. It feels like Sonic Team designed the End as just an extension of all the other enemies, rather than its own entity. Besides, the name's just lame. It's supposed to be this epic alien enemy we're facing. Really needed a different name, like, Zorak, Destroyer of Planets, or something.
Okay, you're now disqualified for mocking other people's names. But yeah, so the end is pretty boring. A rock in space. Sure, Sonic villains are kind of basic, but at least they look cool.
Apparently, in a post-game interview, Sonic Team said that we never actually saw the end's true form. It's just a representation of death, and everyone sees it differently, and we see it as the moon because the moon is symbolic of death, I guess. Could have been a skull or a generic Grim Reaper instead. I hate the idea of Sonic destroying death itself. That's way too big of a concept for a last-minute twist boss. Like, what, we destroy deaths and everyone's immortal? Let me guess, Sonic Team is never gonna elaborate. We just punch the Grim Reaper into dust and everyone goes their merry way like everything's hunky-dory again.
So the main theme of Sonic Frontiers seems to be death. The Ancient's desperate attempt to escape it, Sage locking away Eggman in cyberspace to protect him like an overbearing mother, and Sonic defiantly staring death right in the face, slowly dying but still bravely continuing his mission regardless of his fate. Inspiring Sage that keeping everyone locked up in cyberspace may not be the answer, but facing death is.
How brave. Well, I would choose death over an eternity of Green Hill Zone 2, but still. And so Sonic dies, and then gets resurrected, like Jesus, and then turns super and with the help of a battle robot flies up to death and shoots him to pieces. Like Jesus Chuck Norris! Moral of the story, don't worry about death. Your worthless friends will sacrifice themselves for you anyway, and then you can bring them back alive too. And then shoot lasers at death until he explodes, so that little wiener will never bother you, or anyone else, ever again. Yeah, fuck you, death!
I don't think that's really what the writers intended, but glad it got you inspired.
Hey Merlina, remember when I taught you that death is inevitable and you need to accept it? Well, that only counts for your stupid face and your dumb little kingdom. When death comes for me, it's pow, bam, blammo, ha! When I'm on my deathbed and death's coming, I'll welcome him with open arms. Open robot arms right before I sock him! Boom!
Well, good luck with that. Yep, Merlina and Mephiles, this guy is not. I would love to see Dark and Light Gaia kick this guy back into space if he tried to attack Earth.
So, besides the lame final boss, the story felt a little hollow to me. I guess the game is doing the Sonic Adventure storytelling again, where a tragedy that happened a long time ago is entirely unrelated to the main heroes, but because of Eggman's meddling, still gets swept up in the consequences of whatever disaster was released by the true antagonist. This time it's kind of missing the personal touch, though. With Sonic Adventure 1, you have Tikal as representative of the ancient past, guiding the heroes and putting a kidnap phase in a tragedy, while Perfect Chaos is both the physical and emotional hurdle they need to overcome. Sonic Adventure 2, you got Shadow as both the heart of the story and as the agent representing Gerald Robotnik, and yeah, BioLizard is kind of boring, since Shadow took Perfect Chaos' emotional element with him. So BioLizard is merely the physical threat representing Gerald Robotnik, I guess. Anyway, point is, with Shadow and Tikal, you got human-esque faces to represent the past, and a villain with a tragic, emotional problem to deal with. Now we get Sonic Frontiers, and, well, who's the Tikal of the game?
That would be the Cocos. They are the human, or alien, representatives of the past.
But unlike Shadow or Tikal, they never really interact with a present-day cast. They're long dead and only exist as lingering final thoughts.
I'm pretty sure that Amy, Tails, and Knuckles seem to talk to them, helping them with finding their true love or get ready for battle.
Yeah, but that came across to me as just their lingering final thoughts, the ghostly remains of their last mission, their last goal in life. I didn't get the impression Tails or Amy really had conversations with them, just that they kind of picked up on their final ghost missions and helped them move on from there.
Perhaps, but then there's the Hermit and Elder Coco, who do certainly interact with Sonic, commenting on events and upgrading Sonic's skills.
That's a good point. Although, I feel that's kind of cheating, like Sonic Team just desperately wanted to have a shop with upgrades in a game that otherwise is just a dead, empty wasteland with no civilization, so just had that Coco fall in. I mean, if the Elder and Hermit Coco were legit characters like Shadow or Tikal, you'd think they would commentate on what's going on. Kind of weird they have absolutely nothing to say about their old nemesis returning.
Well, they can't. They lost their memories. So I guess they're also just stuck in the past, their minds only revolving around the last duties they had before death.
Right, so when all's said and done, they're just echoes of the past just like the regular Cocos, and not really an active participant in the story like Tikal or Shadow were, so we're back where we started.
And with only brief glimpses of the ancients themselves, it's up to the villain to pick up the slack and bring in the personal and emotional dimension of the story. So here's the end. Space rock.
Yeah. Or it's the representative of death, apparently. A theme that has nothing to do with Tails, Amy, Knuckles, or Sage's story, and this is kind of random.
No tragedy that pushed it to do its thing. It isn't representing a hypothetical Gerald Robotnik. It's not a metaphor for the nature of the world like Gaia was for Death and Rebirth. There's nothing to it, just an evil shape for Sonic to punch.
Except the end is the representative of death, provided you read interviews with Sonic Team rather than expect the 2 hours of cutscenes to bother explaining its own villain. But hey, the cutscenes have more important things to do, like have Sage say that the situation is hopeless, say the situation is hopeless, say the situation is hopeless, say the situation is hopeless, think Sonic brings hope, says the situation is hopeless, think Sonic brings hope, says the situation is hopeless, and think Sonic brings hope. Riveting stuff! Are we sure Frontiers wasn't written by the Team Sonic Racing crew? But never mind. The end is Dark Gaia's stupid little brother from space. Except with none of the build-up or presence or the cool design. It doesn't even come equipped with its own chip. How lame.
Well, now that I think about it, there is one interesting thing about the end. One thing that's unique to it and no other Sonic villain has ever had. It's in a position of vulnerability at the beginning, having to be nice to Sonic to get him to release it from its prison.
That is theoretically a very cool concept as something that could have given the End some depth or at least a fun dynamic with the other characters. Imagine if the End, who already randomly gives itself a female voice to make itself come across as more vulnerable, I guess. Ooh, sexist. Such crude behavior from a planet-devouring rock of pure evil. Anyway, so if we take that idea even further, that it presents itself through a fake vision, like it presents itself to Sonic as a cute, helpless-looking hologram girl, pleading Sonic to help. Please, Obi-Wan, Sonic, you're my only hope. Ah, a cute little angel girl who needs Sonic's help. Ooh, but there's this demonic-looking Sage who's all evil. So Sage telling Sonic to ignore the angelic hologram girl because she's evil, and hologram girl says that Sage is the evil one. Back and forth until in the end, the helpless little angel girl was the end all along, and Sage the sympathetic Eggman mook. Dun dun dun!
Pretty sure that's the plot of every Kirby game. But at least it would have given Sage more to do in the story than just keeping Eggman locked up and stalking Sonic.
Right. Too bad that never happens. The end is just, you're the key, now do as I say! And Sonic dutifully complies. No sense of betrayal or dynamic bickering, so as a result, the end squanders its only potentially interesting aspect, and is now doomed to go in history as the most boring Sonic villain of all time. Yes, more boring than SCRHD from Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. At least that thing doesn't look like a rock.
Disappointing. But you can't deny the fact that Tails, Amy, and Knuckles getting some serious cleaning up is a miracle. It's so satisfying to see Tails acknowledge he was done dirty in the last few games, and re-railed back into the Tails we know and love. One of Ian Flynn's greatest strengths is his ability to take inconsistencies in previous stories and retroactively work them back into the characterization of the cast. Knuckles being made into an army general in Forces was sudden and random, but this game celebrates it as a natural part of who Knuckles truly is. Combined with his actual original characterization returning, it marries the two together into one satisfying whole. And the surgical removal of Amy's love obsession with Sonic is expertly handled by rebranding it into her wanting to bring happiness in general to all people, perfectly morphing her old love-obsessed personality into the team leader she was in Sonic Heroes and the IDW comics.
Very good stuff. Although it kind of felt empty to me, since in the end it's nothing but talk. Maybe it's because I'm a cartoonist, but to me things aren't real when characters just say things. It needs to be demonstrated physically in action. Especially since the meta era of Sonic had this tendency of being very loose with what a character said, and often were just meant as fourth-wall breaking gags you were supposed to just chuckle at and ignore, rather than consider it legitimately part of the characters in their world. So I'm a bit wary of just taking things by their words. Not after Sonic Forces and its dumbass Sonic is tortured nonsense, where characters would constantly talk about huge plot points that only exist in references, but were never really followed up on in the story itself. Or heck, Sonic Boom's pathetic Son-Amy romance everyone loves, even though, far as I can tell, the alleged romantic relationship Sonic and Amy have on that show only exists in isolated gags and references, and is never demonstrated through character chemistry or actual plot lines.
Let's keep Sonic Boom out of this. That's a whole different side series of Sonic. Is what I would like to say, but then Six the Badger is acknowledged to be canon in the ending cutscene of the game, so now I don't know anymore.
Ah, yes, the references. Let's talk about those. I remember Ian Flynn once said that he loved to put references in the script just to test which characters Sega would protest to and which they wouldn't. Sad that that's the way he has to get a clear answer from Sega, and that there's no proper documentation about it, but that's life. Heck, at my own job, I often have to rely on just vaguely do what you think you need to do and wait until someone starts screaming angry just to get feedback strategies, because managing people is hard.
I like references from Ian Flynn more than the other writers, because at least Flynn makes them work in context. However, I agree it can still feel cheap, especially after the last few games taught us not to take references seriously anymore.
I think references would be better accepted if we saw them physically represented. Don't just say Tangle exists here and we have to assume the IDW comics are canon now. And not Sonic just saying a random reference that's not supposed to actually mean anything. Have Tangle physically show up as a town NPC we can talk to make it real. Hence why I hope the next Sonic game will actually be set in Sonic's natural environment and have actual towns this time, rather than him just being sent to another stupid limbo dimension or dead wasteland in the middle of nowhere again.
Yeah, well, talk is cheap, actions are expensive. Very expensive. With Sonic Team's budgets, I'm not holding my breath. Styx the Badger being referenced is a bigger surprise, though. IDW comics were designed to be part of the game universe, but Sonic Boom was meant to be a side series. Granted, Styx appeared in an Olympic game before, so I guess those are canon now? I don't know. But we can officially refer to the 6-year-old Cream as 7-time Olympic official. She's managed more Olympics than years she's been alive.
Very impressive. Comic book time, as TV Tropes calls it. Kind of funny. Sonic Boom threw in stuff like Shadow or Knuckles' backstory in with no context, and now their characters thrown into the main games with no context in return. Not that Styx was ever given any context, even in her own spin-off series, though. Still, unlike Shadow or Knuckles, Styx and Tangles aren't really context-driven characters, so they can easily just show up as random energetic civilians that happen to know Sonic and friends from Pilates class or something. Who knows?
So that's what it all boils down to in the end, it seems. Budget. Frontiers is an amazing game for what it is, a new step in a better direction, but Sega can't afford to stagnate and leave it here. We appreciate the improvements made, but Frontiers has to be followed up by a game that pulls it to the next level on all accounts. Improving on Tails' character is going to mean squat if he'll remain on the sidelines. Open Zone is the perfect opportunity to get the other characters involved again. With the focus shifting from speedy platforming to combat, the other abilities feel more natural to integrate. Come on, Sega, Sonic's in the best shape he's ever been. Time to upgrade the budget a little.
Other playable characters, like that would happen. At best, it's cheaply thrown in skins without a proper storyline, probably. Or not. Holy shit, I did not see that one coming. Cool. I'll stay on the cynical caution side until the DLC's released, though. I've been burned too much for blind faith. Either way, I'm really curious how Sonic Frontiers is going to age. More than any Sonic game before, it's so depending on what came before and what comes after. And unlike Unleashed or Adventure or Colors or anything, this game doesn't really stand on its own. It's directly commentating on the games before this, and the story is mostly setting things up for the next one, rather than be a satisfying event in and on itself, which kinda leaves me feeling empty by the end of this. I'm not sure if I'm gonna remember Frontiers that fondly in the future, since there's not that much going on, really. It's filled with stuff, but very little meaning. It's just watching Janitor Flynn clean up the mess from the previous games. He fixed the train wreck back into a functioning machine, but by the end of the game, the train station's still closed and we still didn't really go anywhere. All we have is hope that we finally have a functioning vehicle again. And hope is a valuable thing, so I guess I am grateful for Frontiers. Well, whatever. Sonic Frontiers! Awesome music, though.
Awesome music. And, I guess since Luke's not here, cheerio!